If you can hear me, please let me know. I'm hoping that the signal and the sound will work tonight. Apologies for last week. Thank you, Aisha G. Okay, we will get started. Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Aim Saraswate Namaha. Om Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandim Pushti Vardhanam Urva Rukamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritata. Om Tat Sat. Divine blessings to everyone. Welcome to Yoga Vasistha this evening. Tonight we'll be doing a repeat of last week since there was some sound signal issues, some challenges. So far it seems like everyone can hear me. So if you cannot hear me, then just let me know. I have the comments pulled up so I can see.
And tonight I wanted to open up with the daily reading for January 9th from Swami Sivananda. And this is from the Daily Readings book that you can get on the Divine Life Society website. And it's titled Restless Mind and the Dubious Mastery. You can bore a diamond with a bristle. You can tie an infatuated elephant with a slender silken thread. You can bring the sun down for the play of your child. You can make the flame of fire burn always downwards. But it is difficult to control the mind. For gaining mastery over the mind, you have to know what it is, how it works, how it deceives you at every turn, and by which methods it can be subdued. As long as the mind restlessly wanders amidst objects, remains fluctuating, excited, agitated, uncontrolled, the true joy of the self cannot be realized and enjoyed. To control the restless mind and still perfectly all the thoughts and cravings is the greatest problem of man. If he has subjugated the mind, he is the emperor of emperors. Jai Shri Swami Sivananda. Once again, that's from Daily Readings for January 9th. And you can find that book on the Divine Life Society headquarters website. And tonight we'll be repeating last week's, and we were in book 1. So there's 2 volumes, and these were translated and commentary by Swami Jyotirmayananda. And you can get these through the Yoga Research Foundation website, yrf.org. And we're in book 1, part 1, which is Vairagya Prakarana, on section 29, the essencelessness of all objects. So Lord Rama is still speaking, and he is explaining and going through how he feels about the transience of everything. The perception of pain in the world is like a forest fire that has consumed my mind. Just as a mirage is impossible in a lake, so too the mirage of worldly enjoyments cannot manifest in the lake of my mind. And this touches on our different perceptions and how we see things in the world and the objects that our senses interact with. And it comes back to the topic of equanimity of our mind, and how, due to the ignorance of our self, our true self, the higher self, we relate our feelings and our interactions with the objects, such as like a pen. Like, this pen brings me joy, this pen brings me happiness, but technically it actually doesn't. It's just a pen. It is just an object. The ignorance is putting that happiness on this and basing it on this, where happiness is not found in the object. And so the perception of pain in the world being a forest fire that has consumed the mind, when we have attachments to these worldly objects, it can bring pain and sorrow, because the mind is consumed like a wildfire. The mind is consumed with attaining these objects, keeping these objects, not losing these objects. And that's all that's kind of thought about, without understanding that these objects don't go with us when we leave the physical form. All these objects, these items, these things that we have, that we use, are all transient. Even our job titles or familial titles, community titles, all these things are transient. They're temporary. They don't last forever. Just as a neem tree continues to become more and more bitter as it grows and matures, so the world is becoming increasingly bitter as time passes on. And we can see this in today's world, where so many people are becoming materialistic and they're buying more and more and more things and identifying themselves with these objects that they've attained, that they have bought, that they filled their house with. Or they're identifying themselves with fancy cars, fancy houses, fancy clothes, or their wealth, fame, things like that. And so as the world goes on and time is passing by, these objects and these things they're like more in our face. And a lot of us can relate to it depending on our ages, but if you're anywhere from 20 and older, you should be able to relate to this, because in regards to like television commercials, there used to not be so much like in your face. And then growing up, where when I was younger, we didn't have Wi-Fi and we didn't have everything at our fingertips. We didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have social media. And then as time went on, all these things and this new technology comes out and it's so in your face, and then there's advertisements for everything. And then with technology, you have algorithms and targeted ads, and it's just so in your face, in your face, in your face. And it seems to get more and more like that as time goes on. And that feeds into people feeling that it's almost like what they call FOMO, fear of missing out. And so a lot of people, they develop this fear that they're missing out if they're not buying what is suggested, or they're not buying what everybody else is. And due to our ignorance, we don't understand that these things are all causing pain. These things are causing the fear, the anxiety, the sorrows. Because you might feel good for a second when you get it, but then how do you feel the next day? How do you feel in a week? How do you feel in a month or a year? Miraji Guru Ma is not doing her Katha Upanishad video tonight. She's taking a rest. So it's only Yoga Vasistha this evening. This world grows like a thorny karanja bush. Dharma, righteousness, continues to decline. Adharma, unrighteousness, is increasing day by day. Goodness wanes while evil waxes. The ethical standards are being broken by the ascendance of unrighteousness. I deem seclusion far better than a life immersed in royal enjoyments, envenomed with mental grief. Excuse me. So we have to remember that Lord Rama is from royalty. And so seeing the ethical standards around him being broken, and he's still young during this time, and so it's a short amount of time where he's gained all this wisdom, and he's noticed these things, and he's realized these things, and he can see and understand that growing up and everything that comes with royalty, whether it's entertaining others or the wealth, the name, the fame, the fancy clothing, the riches, and all of that stuff. He says that they're envenomed with mental grief, and it's like they're poisoned because Lord Rama has already developed that intuitive vision and that Vairagya, that dispassion, where he understands that all these things are transient, all these things are essencelessness. They don't have the essence of the true self. It is not the source of joy, the source of peace, the source of happiness or contentment. And so, despite having all these riches or kingdoms or land or anything like that, he doesn't see the point, because all it's going to bring is that mental torment, that mental grief, and that is not the path that he is on. That's not the path he's seeking. That's not the path that he wants to be. A garden redolent with flowers does not delight my heart. The perspectives of sex and wealth do not gladden my spirit. I desire to possess a mind that is quiescent and peaceful. And so even gardens full of flowers and everything, he is understanding that these things are transient, these things are temporary, and the attachment to gardens, the attachment to these things around him is only going to bring grief and sorrows. And he's even talking about the perspectives of sex and wealth, and that doesn't gladden his spirit, because those things too are also transient. And those things are not auspicious desires. Those are materialistic. Those are worldly desires. And the desire that he wants is more in the category of auspiciousness, because he's desiring to possess a mind that is still, that is calm and peaceful and at rest, and not constantly agitated and irritated or full of anxiousness or fears, anxieties, and worries. O adorable sage, this world is devoid of happiness. It is perishable. Craving continues to well with a piercing intensity. The mind continues to stay fickle and restless. To expect peace from this world is ridiculous. I am ever immersed in the thought of attaining freedom from all cravings through liberation. And so what Lord Rama is wanting is he wants to be liberated from the world process, from this constant cycle of birth and death that he's seeing. And so this is what he's talking about, how the mind, it's fickle, and it can bounce from one thing to another thing, one desire to another desire, or how people can get like the gimmies, or it's like, give me that, give me that, give me that. And his thoughts is more consumed about the freedom from all of those cravings. And the only way that we can become free from these cravings and from all these attachments and these desires is through liberation. And we're liberating the soul, we're liberating the mind, we're going beyond the transience of the worldly objects. We're going beyond the three gunas. We're not staying at that physical plane, the earthly plane, the worldly plane. You go beyond that, kind of like seeing the bigger picture. So looking beyond our limited concepts of what we think is freedom, because most of us would think that freedom could mean having a lot of wealth and being able to do what we want and afford what we want, or look the way that we want, or have enough money to where we don't have to work, and so we have time to do whatever we want. And that's not necessarily freedom, because in the end, when we come to the end of our physical embodiment, what did all of that do for us? Are we bringing that with us? Is the soul taking that? Or does it all stay behind? I do not welcome death. I do not welcome life either. I want to attain that lofty state wherein I can become free from the fevers of the world process. And so he doesn't welcome death, but he also does not welcome life, because life and death are two sides of the same coin. It's a cycle, and the point of self-realization and liberation is coming out of this repeated cycle. And so you're not gonna come back and do all of this again. You're not gonna go through all this pain again, all the sorrows again. You become liberated. The soul is liberated and merges with Brahman. And so what he's wanting is to attain that lofty state, that state of merging with Brahman, where the soul is free from all the sorrows, all the pain of the world process, and going through the repeated cycles of birth and death. What have I to do with kingdom? What purpose can these fleeting enjoyments serve for me? What can I gain through wealth? It is the ego sense that lends values to all these. In me, this ego sense is dead. And so what Lord Rama is explaining is how our ego, which is considered one of the senses that we experience, that the soul experience, and the ego has to be controlled eventually. And the ego is very sneaky and very, very subtle. And when we get into thinking about where our ego is at in our daily lives and the choices we make, the actions that are being taken, the things that we say to other people, the ego can be extremely sneaky. Even if it's not intentional, that's how sneaky it can be. It can be to the point where you're not aware of it. And an example that I like to use is, because some people are familiar with it, or it's kind of like not a trend per se, but you can see a lot of videos on social media where people walk up to homeless people and they're recording it and they're giving them a lot of money, or they're bringing them food, they're doing something nice. And yes, the action is good. That person is benefiting from the help or the assistance. The idea is good, but that helper, the person giving the items, they have their phone out and they record this. And a lot of people will record these actions and post them on social media, not for awareness. So there is a difference where people post things for awareness or to encourage others. But then there's the other side, the ego side, where people do these things for a matter of how many views can I get, how many comments can I get, how much money can I make off of what I'm doing. And that's where the name and the fame comes in. And this can be applied to a lot of different things, even in like the world of academics and academia and publishing, like research. This also happens, and it can happen pretty much anywhere. So that's where like the ego is sneaky, and it can like pop up like, yeah, I'm doing this for someone else, but in the back of my mind and in my senses and my emotions, are we looking at how we benefit from what we are doing also? Because that's where we need to check in with ourselves. And are we doing it out of purity, or are we doing something out of the ego sense? And so Lord Rama, the ego sense in him is dead, and it is the ego that is lending value to all these worldly objects, and he's not involved with that. So he doesn't see what the purpose of him being in the kingdom and doing the ruling and the kingdomly kind of things. It is difficult to detach the senses from sense objects. The individual soul is tied to the cycle of birth and death through the knotted rope of attachment. And so, again, the senses and the sense objects and our attachment to these, and the attachment is what gets broken when we develop the intuitive vision and the dispassion. And so the intuitive vision is being able to look at things in a different light, I would say in the real light, because you're looking at things through the lens of real and not real. What is this? And what is this not? And so one of the attachments, personally for myself, that I had to really work through was as being a mother and having an adult child now. My eldest is 20 and will be 21 soon. And during those teen years and the older years, that attachment kind of rears its head, and the ego, because you want what's best for your child as a parent, as a mother. But at the same time, you have to cut the rope. You have to let go. You can't tell them what to do. They have to lead their own life. They have to make their own mistakes. They have to learn their own lessons. You can be there to support. You can be there to guide, but you can't control. And that is a hard attachment to work on for the majority of people. And so it is difficult to detach from different things. And even other things, like if you look at food and eating all the sugary sweets and candies and all those kind of things, and we're delighting the senses, the taste buds, and you eat it and you enjoy it, and then that craving's fulfilled now, and it diminishes, and later on it comes back again. And so it's really hard to get off that train of attachment. And so the soul, we're tied to the cycle of birth and death through attachment. That is one of the reasons why the soul would continue to come back into the world process and do things over and over. Just as an elephant tramples upon a soft flower, so the momentum of passion crushes the tender blooms of the mind. If this mind is not treated during youth, how can it be treated when the disease of the world process is allowed to intensify during old age? And this is a really good segment, because the mind... Sorry, my watch is going off. The mind is like a sponge when we're really young, and it soaks in everything. But Are we soaking in the good information, the beneficial information, or are we soaking in what doesn't help the soul and it doesn't help the spiritual journey? And so in the youth, if the mind is not worked on and we don't learn how to control the mind when we're young, as you get older and you go through old age, these attachments intensify, because the realization of aging and the transient nature of being a human, it is more apparent the older that you get. And so that can bring a lot of anxiety and fear of, what have I accomplished? What have I not done that I wanted to do? And we can avoid those feelings as we age if we work on the mind. Because if you imagine an elephant trampling upon soft flowers, like running through a field of soft flowers, that's how passions can crush the mind, and it just goes in through it, squash, 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 squash. And so you have to work on the mind, you have to train the mind, you have to clean up the mind. Sense objects are worse than poison. A poisonous substance kills the body once, but attachment to the sense objects continues to kill this body from one embodiment to another. And so if you imagine poison, and like if this was a vial of poison and you drink the poison, it would kill the physical body. But then because of that act, because of that action, the body is now going to come back. And so you're going to have another cycle of birth and death. And so it might kill the body once, but attachment to sense objects will continue to kill the body from one embodiment to another. And so the attachment is what carries on. And so if you have attachments at the time of death, the soul is going to carry on these attachments into the next embodiment. And it's just like a vicious cycle until you break that cycle. Pleasure, pain, friend, relative, life, and death. All these cause bondage in the mind of an ignorant person. A man of enlightenment is not overcome by these. Therefore, O crest jewel of the wise, please instruct me with that wisdom which will free me from grief, fear, and misery. So pleasure and pain, friend, relative, life, and death. Lord Rama is listing these as causes of bondage in the mind. So due to our ignorance, the soul will end up repeating the cycles of birth and death, because basically we're indulging our senses in pleasures and we're causing ourselves pain with our attachments. We're causing ourselves pain with our ego and how we act and how we behave and how we move in the world. Being attached to friends, being attached to relatives, the cycle of life and death. This is bondage in the mind of an ignorant person. But like the sages and saints that are enlightened, they're not overcome by these. And so when good things come, they have that equanimity of mind. When challenging things arise, the mind is still even keel. It is still peaceful. It is at rest. And like earlier, Lord Rama mentioned, that is what he's wanting. That is what he has. He knows that the worldly objects and the kingdom and everything that comes with royalty, all it's going to do is cause pain and sorrow and suffering. And so he's asking for the instructions on how to free himself from the grief of going through pain, how to release himself from fear and misery while living in the world, especially as part of royalty. Ignorance is like a terrible forest. The subtle desires for the objects of the world are like traps spread by the hunter Death. Its highlands and lowlands, its pleasures and pains, are covered with the thorns of miseries. I aspire to be released from this forest. So imagine our ignorance of our true self as this thick forest, and amongst this forest are like bear traps, like if you know what bear traps look like with the claws. So imagine a bunch of these that are just kind of hidden around in the forest, and the person that laid all of these is Death. And so because of our ignorance, you can end up in these traps, and you are trapped by Death. You are trapped by the pleasures and pains of the world process, the thorns and miseries. And so Lord Rama wants to be released from that forest. And so cleaning up the mind and illuminating the mind and not having this dense, terrible forest that's full of all these worldly traps. Blinded by the taint of ignorance, my mind trembles like the flame of a lamp buffeted by gusts of wind. It is ever involved in removing that which is undesirable and acquiring that which is desirable. And so due to ignorance, our mind, it wavers a lot, like how the flame of a candle wavers. And we're always looking at what's desirable, and we want that, and so we go for that, and then we see other things that we might not like and is undesirable, and so we avoid and we don't go after these things. We don't like these things, they're not desired. And this actually reminds me of a conversation that I had with Guruji a few years ago, and it was the first time in a conversation that I had with him where I used the word hate, and I got lectured on using that word. If you ever use the word hate with Guruji, you probably heard the same kind of lecture. It was a word that he did not like to have in his vocabulary, and you rarely ever heard him say it. He very swiftly corrected me and said to use the word dislike. And instead of using the word hard when things are hard, he would use the word challenging. And so that was a game changer in how I would think about things, like how my mind would be. And so when I was faced with things that I would have defined normally as undesirable, or I hate this, I hate that, I changed the way I thought. And over time with practice, your mind does still a bit more. And so when these challenging moments come and you're faced with things that might have not gone how they were planned, or things that didn't work properly, or kind of anything you can think of, even if you're in the kitchen and you're cooking and you expect something to come out good and tasty, and then you go taste it and it doesn't taste right, or it burnt. instead of getting angry or anything. You just see it more as a challenge, and there's a lesson behind what is happening, because everything does happen for a reason, but we might not see it at that time or in that moment because of our ignorance, because of the limitations of our mind in that current state. And so Lord Rama is saying that it is ignorance which is causing a lot of the wants and I don't want, likes and dislikes, because there's always going to be opposites. But in the bigger picture of things, going beyond these pairs of opposites, you can see that it's not really opposites, and our likes and our dislikes is the ego and our senses, and there's all these different factors, and it's kind of different, I think, for everybody, because you end up analyzing different things. And so for one person, how they were raised could play a part, and so that's something that has to be analyzed and looked at, and that could play a part in wanting or not wanting something, or liking something and disliking something. Craving is like a subtle thread that has pierced the minds of people and has woven them into a garland. Just as a vigilant lion breaks loose from its fetters, that is how I want to break down the fetters of anger, hatred, and other evils with the force of wisdom acquired from your teachings. So if you think of a lion that has been caught, and how ferocious like a lion would be, and how much effort and strength and determination would a lion put into escaping from being caught or escaping from its trap. That's how Lord Rama is wanting to break down these fetters of anger and hatred and other evils. He wants to put that oomph, that force, that determination towards these. And this is how, as aspirants and as devotees, we need to be putting in intense self-effort, or in other words, as much effort as we are able to do. And that looks different for each person based on what your duties are. It's different for each person. There is no mental problem which cannot be dissolved by good association with a wise person. There is no darkness which cannot be dispelled by the sun. And I like how Lord Rama is bringing up good association, because that's like what we're doing now. And that's Satsanga. And that is being involved with other like-minded spiritual people and surrounding ourselves with that spiritual energy and that upliftment, because being human, we're going to have challenges and we're going to come across different struggles in this embodiment, in this life. And having that good association with the wise, with sages and saints and other swamis and gurus, and just having that spiritual family, that connectedness, we're able to overcome these challenges by uplifting each other. And that's like how we've all been pillars of support for each other during this time, after Guruji's passing and leaving his physical embodiment and continuing on his teachings and being an example as aspirants and leaning on each other. There is no darkness which cannot be dispelled by the sun. And so there is no darkness that cannot be dispelled by the light. And there's always light. There is light within each and every one of us. It might be really dim and not very raging, fiery, bright in some of us, and then in other people it might be like a massive lighthouse guiding others. And so it'll be different with each one of us, but no matter the amount of darkness that one may feel they have inside of them, that darkness can always be overcome. It can always be overcome being with the right types of people, surrounding ourselves with good people, surrounding ourselves with the scriptures, and spending time in that quietness of our heart, the quietness of our mind, where we can connect and we can communicate with God, and we can have that time, and we can gain that wisdom and that knowledge to overcome things. There's things in my life I never thought I would overcome ever. I can look back on how Facebook memories pop up, and you can look at your memories over the years, and there's everything from major depression, anger, hopelessness, suicidal thoughts, like every last thing. I used to be a drug addict. I used to be an alcoholic. I was a horrible mom for the longest time. I had a lot of anger, and I never thought I could ever overcome so many things. And being 37, I've probably been through things that someone 80 years old has been through. And that's a long story. I can tell it one day. But no matter how dark it got, and no matter how alone I thought that I was never alone. And I always had God with me and within me, and that light just needed to shine a bit brighter. I needed a bit more fuel going, and at that time I didn't have that. And that fuel is like the good association and reading the scriptures and having Guru and Guru Ma to talk to and learn from. And so this is the end of section 29, the essencelessness of all objects. Next week will be section 30, request for spiritual instructions. And thank you everybody for participating and hopping on. I know we're all adjusting and adapting, and I know that that is what Guruji would want us to do, and he would be proud of us all. Om Tat Sat, Aisha Ji, thank you. Yes, that day was crazy last week. I don't know what went wrong. I think it was a Facebook glitch. Jared G, Om Tat Sat, divine blessings. Guru Ma, divine blessings. Om Tat Sat. Please get some rest. Know that we are all with you. Miraji, pranams, divine blessings. Thank you for all the support. Shobnaji, Om Tat Sat, divine blessings. Rupa and Renita, G, Om Tat Sat. And my prayers are with everyone, especially the ones in California with all the fires right now. I hope everyone is as safe as can be and being practical. Om Tat Sat, divine blessings, everyone.